Why does a new president put his hand on the Bible to take his oath of office? Why does he take an oath at all? It's because the Bible is the soul of Western civilization. If it wasn't for the Bible, America would be ruled by a Machiavellian king rather than by a president. A king makes the law. A president upholds the law and executes the law. Coronation puts a king above the law. During the inauguration, a president affirms that he is under the law. I studied political science in a secular university in India. Our professors taught us that modern democracy came from Greek city-states. But they also contradicted themselves when they told us that Greek democracy killed Socrates, and therefore, when his disciple Plato wrote the first political treatise called the Republic, he condemned democracy as the worst of all political systems. Plato argued that the ideal republic should be ruled by a philosopher king. Plato's disciple Aristotle tried to implement Plato's idea when he trained Alexander the Great to become a philosopher king. Alexander hired the best available philosophers as his advisors, but he became one of history's most ruthless tyrants. His successors were even worse. As a result, beginning with the Greco-Roman world, the Western tradition had no political idealism. There was the dark realism, cynical pragmatism. In the beginning of the 16th century, an Italian diplomat and political philosopher, Machiavelli, wrote a treatise called The Prince, in which he studied Alexander the Great's tactics of building his empire. He also looked at the classical tradition and his contemporary kings who were successful and outlined the principles of successful politics. Machiavelli was a political realist. He advises the prince that given the fact that people are so bad, if a king tries to be good, he would only harm himself. A prudent ruler ought not to keep faith when doing so would not be in his best interest. He should do what is necessary to stay in power, which may mean deception, intrigue, manipulation, violence, cruelty, even murder. Machiavelli dedicated his book to the ruler of Florence, Lorenzo da Medici. About 50 years later, Lorenzo's daughter Catherine, who became the Queen of France through marriage, implemented the political strategy that Machiavelli recommended. By her time, the Reformation had begun to sweep France. A strong Protestant minority had emerged in France. The Huguenots, as they were called, were demanding that the institutions of society, as well as our individual lives, should be governed by the moral principles of the Bible, and that should apply to the state as well as to the church. This threatened the corruption which was prevalent in the courts as well as in the church. So in order to protect her power, Catherine teamed up with the Pope, hired mercenaries from Switzerland, and organized the infamous massacre of 1572. The church bells started ringing at 2 o'clock in the morning. The gates of Paris were shut. The soldiers and angry mobs moved into houses. They threw the devout religious Huguenots outside the windows and killed them on the streets. Anywhere from 5,000 to 60,000 people were killed over a period of weeks. That horrendous massacre shook the conscience of Europe. The Huguenots themselves rejected Machiavelli's political strategies and began to look into the Bible to explore how God wants us to govern nations. Out of that came 3 books known as the Trilogy of Freedom by Francois Hotman, Theodore Beza, and third, which is attributed to Philip Mornay. This third book, A Defense of Liberty Against Tyranny, became the most read book during the American Revolution other than the Bible. These 3 books gave birth to the modern idea of constitutional government. They led to the first modern democracy in Scotland, hugely influenced England, Holland, and the development of democracy in Europe. Many things, including the American idea that a government should not be ruled by a king but by a president, came from this book. He argued that because the Bible teaches that God is sovereign, God's sovereignty abolishes the sovereignty of the kings. He also went on to explain from the Bible why people should have authority over the rulers through their representatives, the elders, the senators in the case of America. The officers are there not to look after the king, but to look after the welfare of the commonwealth. The king is like a president among them who possesses only primacy of place. For as the entire people is above the king, so these officers, although below the king as individuals, are above him when taken as a body. This was the arrangement in the kingdom of Israel. The king had his cupbearers, butlers, chamberlains, and stewards or overseers who looked after the royal family. The kingdom had as its officers the 71 elders and the chiefs elected from the several tribes, who took care of the commonwealth in peace and war, and finally the magistrates of the municipalities who looked after the affairs of the several cities, as did the former of the kingdom as a whole. It was the influence of Mornay's book that made it impossible for the revolutionaries in America to think of an American king replacing a British king. At the end of the Revolutionary War, Colonel Louis Nicola proposed to George Washington that he should become America's new king. George Washington responded with these words, "Be assured, sir, no occurrence in the course of the war has given me more painful sensations than your information of there being such ideas existing in the army as you have expressed, and I must view them with abhorrence and reprehend them with severity.